The grand reopening of the Orpheum Hall was the kind of event that glittered. It wasn't just the new crystal chandeliers hanging from the restored ceiling, or the women in dresses that shimmered under their light. It was a feeling in the air, a buzz of expensive perfume and quiet, important conversations. Everyone who was anyone in the city's music scene was there, sipping champagne and admiring the gilded decorations. But the real star, the reason they had all come, was the man standing near the brand new concert grand piano in the center of the stage. His name was Julian Thorne. Photographers hovered around him like bees around a rare flower. He was young for his fame, with sharp features and hair that fell just so. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than the piano tuner's van. Julian was not just a pianist, he was a phenomenon. The magazines called him the technician for his flawless, powerful playing. They also called him the scalpel for his wicked tongue when reviewing other musicians. He cultivated both reputations with care. The piano, a magnificent 9-foot-long beast of polished ebony, was the other guest of honor. The hall had spent a fortune restoring it, and now the head piano tuner, an older man with gentle eyes and calloused hands, was giving a small group of donors a final explanation. He was a quiet man, more comfortable with wood and wire than with people. The action has been completely rebalanced, the tuner was saying, his voice soft. It's very responsive now. Standing slightly behind him was a woman. She looked out of place in the sea of silk and suits. She wore simple, comfortable clothes, dark pants, a plain sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense style. Her name was Elena. She was the tuner's assistant, and her hands, resting at her sides, told a different story than the soft, manicured hands of the audience. They were strong hands with capable fingers, but there was a network of fine lines and a slight roughness to them. They were hands that knew work. Julian Thorne drifted over, a half-empty champagne flute in his own perfectly manicured hand. The crowd of donors parted for him as if he were royalty. "So, this is the legendary instrument," Julian said, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of his own circle of followers. He didn't address the tuner directly. He was speaking to the room. "I've played on Steinways in Berlin, Faziolas in Milan. Let's see if your local restoration holds up." He set his glass down on the piano's closed lid, a small disrespect that made the old tuner wince. Julian sat on the bench with a dramatic flourish and launched into a blistering run. From a difficult Prokofiev piece, the notes were like bullets, precise, fast, and hard. The sound was impressive, a show of pure muscle. He finished with a sharp, loud chord and let the sound fade. He stood up, turning to his entourage with a smirk. "Adequate," he declared. "The tone is a bit bright for my taste. The action is acceptable. I suppose it's marginally better than a student's upright." A ripple of laughter went through his followers. The head tuner's shoulders slumped just a little. He had spent 3 weeks on this piano, loving it back to life, but he said nothing. He was not a man for arguments. Elena, however, had been watching closely. She had been listening not just to the notes, but to the piano itself, the way the hammer struck, the resonance of the strings, the subtle vibration of the soundboard. She saw a tiny, almost invisible flinch in the tuner's face. She took a small step forward. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but clear. It wasn't shaky, just plain. "The sustain pedal," she said. "It's a little sensitive since the re-regulation. If you ease into it, rather than pushing hard, you'll find a smoother blend in the lower registers. It'll warm the tone you found too bright." The room went very quiet for a second. All eyes swung from the famous Julian Thorne to the unknown woman in simple clothes. Julian looked at her as if he had just noticed a piece of furniture had spoken. His eyes traveled slowly from her face down to her practical shoes and back up, lingering on her worn hands. A slow, cold smile spread across his face. "And you are?" he asked, though it was clear he didn't really want to know. "I assist with the pianos," Elena said simply. "Ah," Julian said, the syllable dripping with understanding. He nodded to the people around him. The help, the laughter this time was louder, more certain. He picked up his champagne flute again, using it to gesture toward her. "Let me explain something, my dear. A great instrument is a thoroughbred. It responds to the touch of a master. It's not for the cleaners to give technical notes." He'd meant to say tuners, but cleaners felt crueler, and cruelty often got a bigger laugh. Elena didn't redden. She didn't look down. She just listened, her expression calm and unreadable. Her quietness in the face of his noise seemed to irritate him more than any argument would have. One of his followers, a woman in a very tight dress, giggled. "Maybe she plays chopsticks wonderfully, Julian." Julian chuckled, playing to his audience. Perhaps. But great art, real art, isn't about knowing which lever to push. It's about vision. It's about translating soul into sound. He was giving a soundbite now, performing for the room. Elena waited for him to finish. The silence after he stopped felt heavier than before. She looked not at the crowd, not at his smirking friends, but directly at Julian. And then she spoke again, her voice still that same, calm, even tone. "You play the notes, sir," she said. "You play them perfectly. But you do not play the piano asterisk." The air was sucked out of the room. The giggles died instantly. The head tuner looked at Elena with a mixture of awe and terror. No one spoke to Julian Thorne like that. No one. Julian's smile froze, then melted away. His eyes, which had been full of mocking amusement, turned dark and sharp. The insult was profound. It cut to the very core of the criticism he secretly feared, that he was all technique, no heart. That he was a brilliant machine. And it had been delivered by a nobody, a woman who tuned pianos, in front of everyone. His pride, a vast and fragile thing, couldn't let it stand. He had to squash this, and he had to do it in a way that re-established his dominance. That turned this humiliation into a spectacle he controlled. He set his glass down with a sharp asterisk, click asterisk. He walked until he was standing quite close to her, looking down from his height. The room was utterly still, watching. "Is that so?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You have a very grand opinion for someone who stands in the shadows." He paused, letting the tension build. Then he raised his voice, projecting to every corner of the lavish room. "Well, I believe in settling artistic disputes directly. No gossip, no behind-the-back whispers." He turned to face the whole crowd, a showman taking center stage. "Tomorrow night, right here, on this adequate piano." He gestured broadly. "A little duel. Let's make it a public lesson. I will play, and then you." He turned and pointed a long finger at Elena. "Will show us all what it means to really play the piano. Show us this soul you think I'm missing." He let the challenge hang in the air. The crowd buzzed with shocked, delighted excitement. This was better than the concert. A real-life drama. Julian leaned in a little closer to Elena, his voice dropping back to a vicious whisper meant only for her. "And when you fail, utterly and completely, everyone will see you for what you are. A jealous little mouse who should have stayed in her hole." He stepped back, his triumphant smile returning. He had done it. He had turned her quiet correction into a ridiculous, no-contest spectacle. He would crush her, and his legend would grow. Elena looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the eager, hungry faces of the crowd. She looked at the old tuner, whose eyes were wide with worry. Then, she did something Julian did not expect at all. She simply nodded. "All right," she said, her voice still calm as a still pond. "Tomorrow night." And with that, she turned and walked away, not toward the grand entrance, but through a small, unmarked door at the side of the stage that led back into the dark, quiet workrooms where the instruments lived. The door swung shut behind her with a soft, final click, leaving Julian standing in the glittering light, a sudden, tiny seed of doubt buried deep in his gut. The quiet click of the workroom door shutting behind her seemed to echo louder than any of the noise. In the glittering hall, Elena walked into the familiar, shadowy space, the air smelling of wood polish, felt, and a little bit of dust. The sounds of the party were just a muffled hum through the walls. Here, it was real. Here were the toolboxes, the rolls of tuning pins, the spare strings hanging like metal ivy. She let out a slow breath, one she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands, which had been still at her sides, flexed once, then relaxed. The old tuner, Mr. Alden, pushed through the door a moment later. His gentle face was wrinkled with concern. "Elena," he said, his voice hushed. "What did you just do? That man, he'll eat you alive out there. It's not about music for him. It's a show. A circus." Elena ran a finger along the edge of a workbench, feeling the smooth, worn wood. "He asked for a circus," she said quietly. "He just doesn't know what act he booked." Double quotes. Mr. Alden shook his head, not understanding. He pulled out a stool and sat down heavily. "I've been in this business 50 years. I've seen the proud ones, the geniuses, the madmen. He's the worst kind. All pride, no heart. He'll use this to make himself look bigger. He'll humiliate you for sport." "I know," Elena said. And she did know. She had seen it in Julian Thorne's eyes, not just anger, but a kind of glee at the chance to perform a public execution. Before Mr. Alden could say more, his phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again, and again. He looked at the screen, his eyes growing wide. It's the hall manager, the board, the story. It's everywhere, and it was. While Julian Thorne had been giving smug interviews on the steps of the Orpheum, calling it a charming bit of theater and a public service in art appreciation, the clip of the confrontation had taken on a life of its own. By midnight, it was trending. The headlines were exactly what Julian's publicist would have ordered. Virtuoso teaches upstart a lesson, and piano duel. Master vs. the nobody. The narrative was set in stone. It was a story of a brilliant, if sharp-tongued, artist defending the high standards of his craft from an ignorant interloper. People took sides instantly, loudly. Tickets for the Orpheum's next evening, now billed as the Duel at the Keys, sold out in 8 minutes. The hall's manager, who had been panicking about the incident, now saw dollar signs and glowing publicity. He called it a bold, interactive artistic experiment across the city. In his luxurious penthouse apartment, Julian scrolled through the news on a large tablet. A satisfied smile played on his lips. The comments were a sea of support for him. Asterisk put that tuner in her place. Asterisk one read. Asterisk can't wait to see his mastery. Asterisk said another. He called his manager. Lean into it, he said. Sell the live stream rights. Get the cameras in close. I want them to see the moment she breaks. The next day, the Orpheum was abuzz with a different, more frantic energy. Stagehands prepared for cameras. Reporters milled in the lobby. Julian arrived in the afternoon for a sound check. Trailed by a documentary filmmaker he'd allowed access, he performed a section of the technically monstrous piece he'd chosen for the Duel, a modern composition full of violent clusters and relentless rhythms. It was designed to be a weapon, to showcase a skill so far beyond her that the audience would laugh her off the stage. Before she played a note, the piano, under his hands, sounded like a machine gun. After he finished, basking in the applause of his small, invited crew, he saw Elena. She had come in quietly through the back and was speaking with Mr. Alden near the side curtains. She was wearing the same simple clothes. Julian swaggered over, the filmmaker's camera following him. Checking the escape route? He asked, his voice light and poisonous. Elena turned. She didn't look nervous. She looked tired and a little sad. We need to agree on the instrument, she said, ignoring his jab. The instrument? Julian laughed. This is the instrument. He slapped the lid of the magnificent concert grand. No, Elena said, her voice firm. Not that one. The Bruckner. The one in the practice room on the 3rd floor. Julian's smirk faded. He knew that piano. Everyone in the professional world knew of it, though few had dared to play it. It was the Orpheum's white elephant, a massive, ornate 19th century beast built by a forgotten craftsman. It was notoriously difficult. The action was heavy and uneven. The tone could be muddy in the middle register, but shockingly bright in the highs. It was an unforgiving, idiosyncratic instrument that revealed every weakness, every shortcut a pianist took. Most considered it unplayable. A museum piece. You're joking, Julian scoffed. That thing is a dinosaur. It's for display. It's the hall's original piano, Elena said. The one this place was built to house. A duel about the soul of playing should be on an instrument with a soul. This one, she gestured to the shiny new grand, hasn't lived long enough to have one. The challenge was clever, and Julian felt a flicker of irritation. Playing the Bruckner was a risk. Its difficulties could trip even him up, but refusing would look like cowardice. He could spin it. He could say he was embracing history, conquering a legend. Fine, he snapped. The Bruckner. It won't save you. It will just make your failure more obvious. He turned and left, already rehearsing in his head how he would explain the piano's quirks, as part of his own conquering narrative. As the afternoon light began to fade, the hall emptied of workers, getting ready for the evening crowd. Elena wasn't in the main hall. She was where she had asked to meet, in the small, tucked-away practice room on the 3rd floor. The Bruckner piano stood there, its dark wood carved with grapes and vines, its ivory keys yellowed with age. Mr. Alden was with her, running a soft cloth over the dust on its lid. You sure about this, Elena? He asked, his voice soft. That young man, he's a storm. He'll play loud and fast. People like loud and fast. Elena didn't answer right away. She sat on the worn bench in front of the Bruckner. She didn't play. She just placed her hands gently on the keys, feeling their cool, smooth surface. She closed her eyes. Mr. Alden watched her. He watched the way her shoulders settled, the way her breathing became slow and deep. He had seen a lot of pianists in his time. He had seen the nervous ones, the arrogant ones, the ones who attacked the keys. He had never seen anyone simply listen to a silent piano, a memory, old and dusty, stirred in his mind. Decades ago, when he was a young apprentice, there had been a story, a prodigy, a young woman from abroad who had studied with one of the last great Russian masters. She had played a single, legendary concert on this very Bruckner piano. People who heard it said it wasn't a performance, it was a séance. The piano had sung for her. Then, suddenly, she vanished. The story said it was a tragedy, something personal, something so deep she never played in public again. The master died. The student disappeared into myth. They called her the ghost of the Bruckner in hushed tones, a folktale for old musicians. He looked at Elena's strong, plain hands resting on the yellowed keys. He looked at her calm, still face, etched with lines that spoke of a life, not of ease, but of feeling. The pieces, impossible and wild, began to click together in his old heart. Elena? He whispered, the name feeling different on his tongue now. She opened her eyes. They were clear and deep. The piece you played at that concert, long ago, Mr. Alden said, his voice trembling slightly. It was the Chopin, wasn't it? The first ballade. A long, quiet moment passed. The only sound was the distant hum of the city through the window. A faint, sad smile touched Elena's lips, a crack in her calm mask showing a glimpse of an old, profound pain. She didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it. She simply looked back at the piano and said, so softly he almost didn't hear, he thinks this is a battle. He thinks it's about winning. She stood up, her hand giving the piano's sturdy frame a gentle pat, like patting the neck of a loyal old horse. It's not a duel, Mr. Alden. It's a reintroduction. She left the room, leaving the old tuner standing in the twilight glow, his heart pounding with a shocking, wonderful terror. He looked at the silent, waiting Bruckner, and for the first time in 40 years, he felt as if the ghost in the room was not a sad story, but a living, breathing truth. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that Julian Thorne had no idea what was about to walk onto his stage. The energy in the Orpheum Hall that night was not like the polished buzz of the reopening. This was something raw, electric, and hungry. It was the crackle before a storm, or the held breath before a car crash. Every seat was filled. People stood at the back. Camera operators from the live stream service moved like ghosts in the aisles, their red lights glowing. You could hear the rustle of expensive programs, the low hum of 1,000 conversations, all asking the same question. Asterisk, how bad would it be? Asterisk, the stage held only the Bruckner piano, looking even more like a dark, sleeping beast under the single spotlight. It was a strange, almost ugly instrument next to the sleek modern grands people were used to seeing. It seemed to belong to a different time, which, of course, it did backstage. The atmosphere was split in two. In the larger, plush dressing room, Julian Thorne was a coiled spring of confident energy. His stylist fussed with his hair. His manager whispered last-minute talking points. Julian warmed up his hands on a silent practice keyboard, his fingers moving in complex, spider-like patterns. He was not thinking about music. He was thinking about angles, about the close-up shot of his face in concentration, about the satisfying, final smirk he would give the camera after his performance. He was the star, and this was his triumphant, if unusual, showcase. In a small, plain room that was more of a storage closet, Elena stood by a window, looking out at the dark city. Mr. Alden was with her, nervously twisting his cap in his hands. She had changed her clothes, but only to a simple black shirt and the same dark pants. She looked like she was going to a quiet job, not a performance for a jeering crowd. You don't have to do this, Mr. Alden said for the 10th time. We can walk out the back. No one would blame you. Elena turned from the window. Her face was peaceful, but there was a light in her eyes he hadn't seen before. It wasn't excitement or fear. It was focus. A deep, quiet focus. He needs to hear it, she said softly. And so do they. A sharp knock came at the door. A young, frazzled stage manager poked his head in. 2 minutes, mess, after Mr. Thorne's introduction, they heard the muffled roar of the crowd as Julian's name was announced. The sound was worshipful, expectant. The duel was on. The stage lights came up full as Julian walked out. He didn't walk. He proceeded. He gave a casual, confident wave to the audience, a king acknowledging his subjects. He stopped at the piano, ran a hand almost lovingly along its carved wood, and turned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice smooth and amplified. We are here for a little conversation. A conversation in the language of music. Some of us speak it with fluency, others, he paused, a slight, mocking smile touching his lips, are still learning their ABCs. I shall begin. He sat. He adjusted the bench with a precise, quick motion. He shook out his hands once, theatrically. Then he dove in. He was playing a piece called The Metal Storm, a modern work famous for its violence and difficulty. From the first crashing chord, it was an assault. His hands were a blur, striking the Bruckner's heavy keys with piston-like force. The sound was immense, a wall of percussive, dissonant noise. He attacked clusters of notes with his fists and forearms, his body jerking with the effort. The piano shook. The music was complex, jagged, and utterly without warmth. It was a display of pure, raw power and technical control. He was wrestling the beast of a piano into submission, and he was winning. The audience watched, mesmerized. This was what they had come for. This was mastery. You could see it in the impossible speed, in the unflinching accuracy. When he ended with a final, earth-shaking cluster that seemed to make the very air vibrate, the reaction was instant and deafening. People jumped to their feet, screaming, whistling, applauding until their hands hurt. It was a triumph of man over machine. Julian stood, breathing slightly heavily from the exertion, a sheen of sweat on his brow. He took a long, slow bow, soaking it in. He looked toward the wings where Elena waited, and his smile was one of pure, unadulterated victory. He had set the bar at the moon. He walked off to thunder that did not seem to want to end. The stage manager scurried to Elena. "Your turn," he said, his voice pitying. Mer. Alden gave her a last, worried look. Elena just placed a hand on his arm for a second, a gesture of thanks and reassurance. Then she walked out. The contrast was shocking. After Julian's theatrical entrance, her walk to the piano was just that, a walk. She didn't look at the audience. Her eyes were on the Bruckner. The applause, still ringing from Julian's performance, quickly turned into a confused, then curious silence. This simple woman looked like a librarian approaching a strange, ancient book. She reached the piano. Instead of sitting immediately, she did something odd. She placed her palm flat against its side, near the curved wood, and held it there for a second, eyes closed. It wasn't a show. It was a greeting. A silent asterisk, hello, old friend asterisk. Then she sat. She adjusted the bench not with a jerk, but with a slow, careful slide, feeling for the right distance. She arranged the simple folds of her shirt. The silence in the hall was now complete and heavy. You could hear a cough from 3 blocks away. The live stream chat, which had been flooding with praise for Julian, slowed to a trickle of question marks. Elena placed her hands in her lap. She took a deep, slow breath in, and let it out. She looked at the keys, and then, she began. It was not a storm. It was not a battle. The first notes were so soft they seemed to form out of the silence itself. They were simple, clear, questioning. It was the opening of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece every pianist knows, a piece many play. But from that very first phrase, something was profoundly different. The sound was not coming from the piano. It was coming asterisk through asterisk her. Her touch was a whisper, a caress. The Bruckner, which had growled and roared for Julian, now sighed. The melody unfolded not as a series of notes, but as a story. Each phrase breathed. There was space, aching and beautiful, between the thoughts. Julian, standing in the wings, arms crossed, had been ready to sneer. He expected fumbled notes, a childish simplicity. He was prepared to dissect her technical failures for the cameras later. But as those first few bars hung in the air, his smug expression froze. He knew this piece. He had recorded it. His version was faster, cleaner, more brilliant. But this was not about brilliance. This was about truth. He heard the weight in the bass notes, not as loud thumps, but as a deep, sorrowful heartbeat. He heard the subtle, heartbreaking hesitation before a turn in the melody, a hesitation that spoke of memory and loss. Her technique was invisible. There was no visible effort, no struggle with the Bruckner's heavy action. The piano was not an opponent. It was her voice. The audience, which had been ready to be polite at best, was utterly still. No one coughed. No one shifted. They were holding their breath. The music was pulling them into a world of gentle twilight, of old photographs, of a joy so deep it was intertwined with sadness. Then the music began to grow, not in volume first, but in intensity. The story was darkening. Elena's body remained still, but her hands were alive. They moved with a fluid grace, drawing out rippling passages that sounded like pouring water, then powerful chords that rose from the piano not as noise, but as waves of emotion. She was not playing the notes on the page. She was having a desperate, beautiful, angry, and loving conversation with the very soul of the instrument, backstage. Mr. Alden had tears streaming silently down his wrinkled cheeks. He was hearing the ghost. The ghost of the Bruckner was not a myth. She was right there, in plain clothes, telling her story. Julian's arms were no longer crossed. They hung at his sides. His mouth was slightly open. The arrogant fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrifying understanding. He was not listening as a rival. He was listening as a student. And he was hearing a master of something he didn't even know existed. This was not a better version of what he did. This was a different universe of feeling. The piece swept into its furious, tragic finale, the coda that is one of the most difficult and violent passages in all of piano music, where other pianists, Julian included, attacked it as a technical sprint. Elena played it as a heartbreaking. The notes were a whirlwind, a storm of grief, but every single one was clear. Every chord had meaning. It was chaos with a purpose. It was devastating. And then, with a series of descending chords that fell like final, heavy tears, it was over. The last note faded into the silent hall. Elena's hands came to rest back in her lap. Her head was bowed. For a long, long moment, there was nothing. No sound at all. Then, a single, choked sob came from the middle of the audience. It broke the spell. The applause did not start as a roar. It began as a wave, a slow, rising tide of understanding, building from a murmur to a thunder that made the cheers for Julian sound hollow and thin. People were on their feet, not because it was expected, but because they had been lifted out of their seats by the music. They were crying. They were shouting not for victory, but for the beauty they had just witnessed. Elena looked up, seemed almost surprised by the sound. She gave the piano one more gentle touch, a thank you. Then she stood, gave a short, simple nod to the audience, and walked off the stage. She walked right past Julian, who stood rooted to the spot in the wings, pale as the ivory keys. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. The music had said. The roar that followed Elena off the stage was not like the noise that had greeted Julian. That had been excitement, the thrill of a spectacle. This was something deeper, messier. It was the sound of an audience waking up from a dream, or maybe falling into one. It was full of shouts, of people sniffling and wiping their eyes, of a stunned, buzzing conversation that was already trying to understand what had just happened. In the wings, the world stood still for Julian. The sound of the crowd was like a physical pressure, pushing against him. He couldn't move. His body, which always knew how to pose, how to present, felt like a statue made of cold clay. All he could see was the empty space where Elena had been standing at the piano. All he could hear, echoing in his skull, was the last, fading whisper of the Chopin, a ghost that wouldn't leave his manager. A man with a sharp face and sharper suits materialized beside him, grabbing his arm. His mouth was moving, but the words were just a buzz at first. Unbelievable. Have to go back out. Bow together. Salvage the narrative. Salvage the narrative. The words finally punctured the fog. That's what this was supposed to be. His narrative. His victory. He blinked, looking at his manager's face. Over his shoulder, Julian saw the stage manager gesturing frantically. They wanted him to go back out, to share the stage with her, to pretend this was a draw, or worse, to act the gracious victor. He shook his head, a tiny, stiff movement. He couldn't, his legs wouldn't work. The idea of standing in that spotlight again, next to the quiet woman who had just dismantled the entire foundation of his pride, made his stomach turn to ice. Instead, he turned and walked. He pushed past the concerned documentary filmmaker, past the confused stagehands, and into the sudden quiet of the backstage hallway. The door to his plush dressing room felt like a refuge. He slammed it shut, leaning against it, the wood cool against his back. The room was a mockery now. The bouquet of roses from a fan looked cheap. The bottle of expensive champagne on ice was a joke. The large mirror reflected a man he didn't recognize, pale, his eyes wide with something that wasn't anger, but shock, a deep, fundamental shock. He had heard perfection before. He had played alongside great technicians. But what he had just witnessed, it wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. She had spoken through the piano. Every note, every silence, had meant something. And the piano had answered her. That old, difficult Bruckner had sung for her in a voice he didn't know it possessed. It had been a conversation between old friends, and he had been nothing but a loud, uninvited guest shouting in the corner. A memory, sharp and unwanted, cut through him. He was 15, in his stern teacher's studio. The old man had played a scratchy, ancient recording. The sound was poor, but the music that came through was haunting. full of a sadness that made young Julian's eyes prickle. That, his teacher had said, his voice gruff with emotion, was the ghost. Played the Bruckner in some hall decades ago. Vanished. No one plays like that anymore. No one feels like that anymore. Remember this, boy. This is the mountain Julian had forgotten. He had chosen faster, shinier mountains to climb. He had dismissed the story as a sentimental myth for old men. Now, in the quiet of his dressing room, the two sounds collided in his mind, the crackly recording from his youth and the clear, living sound that had just filled the hall. They were the same, not just the same piece. The same voice. The ghost of the Bruckner wasn't a ghost. She was a woman in a plain black shirt who tuned pianos. The simple, devastating truth settled over him, heavy and cold. He hadn't challenged an upstart tuner. He had arrogantly, stupidly, challenged a living legend to prove her artistry. And she had, with a quiet grace that shamed his every boast. A soft knock came at the door. It wasn't his manager's impatient rap. It was hesitant. "Go away," Julian said, his voice rough. The door opened anyway. It was Mr. Alden, the old tuner. He stood in the doorway, his cap in his hands, his face not triumphant, but solemn. "She's leaving," he said quietly. Julian stared at him. "Who is she?" The question came out as a whisper. Mer. Alden looked down at his worn cap. "Her name is Elena. She was a student of the last great master of the old Russian school. She was going to change the world. Then, her life, it broke. A loss. A deep, private loss. The music in her, it became a private thing. A thing for herself, and for the pianos she cares for. She hasn't played for people in over 30 years. 30 years. Julian felt the number like a punch. He had been insulting a woman who had mastered the piano before he was born. "Why?" he asked, the word desperate. "Why would she hide that? Why would she let someone like me?" He couldn't finish. Mer. Alden's eyes were kind and sad. "I don't think she was hiding. She just found her music somewhere else. You didn't see a pianist. You saw a helper. You saw only what you wanted to see." Julian pushed himself off the door. He had to see her. He had to say something, though he had no idea what. He brushed past Mr. Alden and hurried down the hall, past the bustling stage area, towards the back entrance where the loading docks were. He saw her then, a solitary figure under a dim yellow light. She was talking quietly with the hall's night watchman, a man she clearly knew. She had a worn canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She looked like she was finishing a late shift, not a conquering hero, just a woman going home. "Wait," Julian called out, his voice echoing in the concrete space. She turned. Her face was calm, tired. There was no anger in it, no gloating, just a quiet exhaustion. He stopped a few feet from her, his words jumbling in his throat. All his clever insults, his witty retorts, were ashes. He was just a man who had been profoundly wrong. "The recording," he stammered. "My teacher. He played a recording. It was you, wasn't it? On the Bruckner." Elena nodded slowly. "A long time ago. Why did you agree to this?" he asked, gesturing back toward the hall, where the distant rumble of the dispersing crowd could still be heard. "You could have just walked away. You should have." She studied him for a moment. "You were very loud," she said simply. "And you were wrong. Not just about me. About the music. About what it's for." She shifted her bag on her shoulder. "It's not a sword. It's not a trophy. It's a language. You forgot how to speak it. You only learned how to shout." Each word was soft, but they landed with the weight of stones. They were the same truth she had spoken at the piano, now in plain words. Julian looked at his own hands, the famous hands, insured for millions. They felt empty. "How?" he asked, his voice cracking. "How can you bear not to share that? To have that gift, and to keep it locked away in practice rooms?" For the first time, a real emotion flickered across Elena's face. It was a deep, old pain. "I share it," she said softly. "Every day, with the instruments. They listen. They remember." She looked past him, into the darkness. "The world wanted a spectacle tonight. It got one. But music isn't a duel. It doesn't live in winning or losing. It lives in the quiet, in the listening." She began to turn to go. "Will you play again?" The question burst from him, a plea. Elena paused. She offered him a small, sad smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I never stopped playing, Julian. You just weren't listening." And with that, she walked into the night, leaving the great virtuoso standing alone under the yellow light, with only the echo of her music and the devastating silence of his own understanding for company. The duel was long over. The lesson, however, had just begun. The world, of course, went a little mad after that night. The video of the duel didn't just go viral. It exploded. It was cut, analyzed, and set to emotional music. The stark contrast between Julian's furious storm and Elena's heartbreaking story was the kind of thing the internet lived for. Headlines flipped overnight from Virtuoso's triumph to the tuner's silence. How a ghost taught a master a lesson. For a week, the Orpheum Hall was under siege. Reporters camped outside. Agents from the biggest classical labels left stacks of contracts at the door of the maintenance office, promising Elena fame, fortune, and world tours. Documentarians wanted to tell her incredible story. Talk shows begged for an interview. The world wanted a piece of the phantom who had appeared from the shadows, humbled a giant, and vanished back into the dark. But Elena had truly vanished. She did not return to the Orpheum. Her small apartment, when a particularly stubborn journalist found it, was empty. A neighbor said she'd moved out quietly a day after the performance. She left no forwarding address. It was as if she had been a mist, condensed for one night into solid, stunning form, and then dissipated again. The mystery only made the legend bigger. Julian Thorne watched this frenzy from a distance. He canceled everything: his upcoming tour, his recording sessions, the high-profile judging gig on a television talent show. His management team was in a panic. This was career suicide. But for the first time in his adult life, Julian didn't care about the narrative. He was living in a different story now, a quieter, harder one. He stayed in the city. He rented a small, plain apartment without a view. He sold his penthouse and his sports car. The money meant nothing. He kept only one piano, a good, but not great, upright that he found in a second-hand shop. It had a sticky key in the middle register and a tone that was honest, not glorious. For the first few days, he didn't play it at all. He just sat in the room with it. The silence in his head was new. It wasn't empty. It was full of the echo of Elena's Chopin. He would hear a phrase in his memory, that aching turn, that whisper soft bass note, and a feeling would wash over him, a deep, shameful longing mixed with a clear, sharp understanding. He had spent his life building a beautiful, intricate castle of skill, and she had shown him it was built on sand. He had confused loudness for power, speed for emotion, difficulty for depth. After a week of silence, he began to play. Not the fierce modern pieces, not the showy concertos. He started with simple scales, but this time, he didn't play them to warm up. He played them to listen. He tried to hear each note, really hear it. How did it start? How did it fade? How did it connect to the next? He played a simple children's melody. He tried to make it mean something, just to the empty room. It was frustrating. His fingers wanted to run, to impress, to dazzle. He had to fight his own instincts, to slow down, to be still. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. He called a press conference. His team, hoping for a comeback speech, prepped talking points about growth and new perspectives. The room was packed. Julian walked to the microphone. He looked different, tired, older, but his eyes were clearer. He didn't smile. "I am taking a sabbatical from public performance," he said, his voice flat and firm. The room erupted in flashes and shouted questions. He waited for it to die down, for an indefinite period. "The reason is simple. I have spent my life learning to speak, but I have forgotten how to listen. I need to relearn." Everything. A reporter shouted. "Is this because of your loss to Elena?" Julian didn't flinch. "It wasn't a loss," he said. "It was a correction. She didn't beat me at my game. She showed me I was playing the wrong game entirely." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I am not retiring. I am returning to the beginning." He took no questions. He walked off the stage, leaving a storm of confusion behind him. He didn't become a hermit. Instead, he started showing up in unexpected places. He volunteered at a community music school in a part of the city he'd never visited, tuning their battered old pianos for free. The children didn't know who he was, and he liked it that way. He just told them his name was Julian, and he was fixing the pianos so they could sound better. He listened to them practice their halting, joyful scales. The sound was full of life, not perfection. And then, one Thursday afternoon, a flyer taped to a lamppost caught his eye. It was simple. Photocopied. Community Music Hour. Every Friday, 3 p.m. Orpheum Hall. Side door entrance. For our neighbors. All ages, all welcome. Hosted by a friend. No charge. Just listening, ****, a strange feeling, a pull, drew him there the next Friday. He went to the grand front doors, then remembered ***, side door entrance ***. He walked around the building to the old, unmarked door that led to the workrooms. The same door Elena had disappeared through after the insult. He pushed it open. The familiar smell of wood and polish greeted him. He followed the sound of a piano, not a grand, but the old, slightly out of tune upright from the third-floor practice room. It had been moved to the edge of the large, cluttered workroom. The room was filled with people, not the glittering crowd from the gala. There were elderly people from the nearby retirement home, some in wheelchairs. There were young mothers with toddlers on their laps. There were tired-looking office workers on their break, and a few street musicians he recognized from the subway tunnels. They sat on folding chairs, on wooden benches, on upturned crates. And at the upright piano sat Elena. She looked the same. Simple clothes, her hair pulled back. She was playing, but it wasn't a performance. It was a conversation with the room. She played a gentle, old folk song. She played a few bars of a movie theme a little girl requested. She played a slow, sweet blues progression that made an old man in the front row tap his foot and close his eyes. A smile on his face. She wasn't the ghost of the Bruckner here. She was just Elena. Her playing was beautiful, but it was not the heart-wrenching, powerful thing from the Duel. It was something else. It was generous. It was a gift offered without conditions, a language spoken softly so everyone could understand. She looked up between songs, her eyes scanning the room. They passed over the faces and landed on Julian, standing in the shadow by the door. She didn't look surprised. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not an invitation, not a forgiveness, just an acknowledgement. ***, I see you, ***. Then she turned to a shy boy of about 10, who was whispering to Mr. Alden. The old tuner smiled and led the boy forward. Elena, this young man has been practicing. The boy, face red, sat on the bench next to her. He began to play a simple piece by Bach, his fingers stumbling. Elena listened, her head tilted. When he finished, flustered, she didn't praise him lavishly. She didn't correct his technique. She pointed to one measure. That little phrase there, she said, her voice as quiet as it had been the night they met. It's a question, isn't it? The music is asking something. Try it like you're asking it softly, not saying it loudly. The boy tried again. The notes were the same, but the feeling was different. It was hesitant, curious. A real musical thought, however small, had been born. The boy's face lit up. Julian watched, leaning against the doorframe. He felt no jealousy, no desire to be the one at the piano. For the first time, he felt something else, a pure, clean understanding. This was the music, not in the roaring halls, not in the shiny recordings, not in the winning or losing. It was here, in the dusty workroom, in the shared silence, in the gentle correction that wasn't an insult, but a nudge toward truth. He didn't approach her. He didn't try to talk. When the hour was over, and people began to shuffle out, chatting softly, he slipped away the way he had come. The next Friday, he was back, and the Friday after that, he always stood in the back, by the door. He listened. He watched the way music, real music, could be a shelter, a comfort, a shared breath in a busy world. One Friday, Mr. Alden came over to him, holding 2 cups of terrible coffee from the ancient workroom pot. He handed one to Julian. She knows you come, the old man said. I know, Julian replied. She won't teach you, you know, Mr. Alden said gently. Not in the way you'd want. She's not that kind of master. Julian took a sip of the bitter coffee. He looked at Elena, who was showing an elderly woman how a certain chord was made, placing the woman's gnarled fingers gently on the keys. I know, Julian said again, and for the first time since the duel, a genuine, quiet smile touched his lips. She already did.